Good morning everyone. Welcome back to the class. So are you all ready with your rough notebook and pen? Shall we start our class? Okay. So now we are discussing about the book. What is the name of that book? Discipline. Yes, it is a geography. Geography. Yesterday I told you to write answer for the exercise question which is given in the end of first chapter. Complete that as soon as possible. Then we can go for the next concept. So now in the last class we started to discuss about the second chapter. It's somewhat lengthy. The name of a second chapter is somewhat lengthy. What is the name of the second chapter then? What is that? Yes, it's a land, soil, water, natural vegetation and wildlife. Land, soil, water, natural vegetation and wildlife. What are these all? What are these? Yes, it is an example for natural resources. Natural resources examples. So the name of the chapter is the land, soil, water, natural vegetation and wildlife resource. Wildlife resource. So you know it's a name for chapter we discuss, and we started to discuss about the first concept. One by one we will continue. We will start to discuss. First one is about the land, and we started to discuss about the land in last class. The land concept. So under this we discuss what is land. The land, and we discuss what is land, how much percent of a land is covered on the earth's surface. So what is the percentage of a land which is covered on the earth's surface? Yes, it's a 30%. Then remaining 70% of earth's surface is covered by water. So that's what we discussed. And in this 30%, only in this 30% of land, how many percent of population they inhabited in the 30% of land? So 90%. Yes, is not. The 90% of population they are inhabited in the 30% of land. Remaining 10% of a population they are inhabited in the 70% of land. So what happened for the 70% of land? Yes, the 70% of land consists of different topographies, different climatic conditions. There is not having the basic need availability. There is a scarcity of basic needs in the 70% of land mass, like mountains and desert, coastal plains, islands. So these all comes under this 70%. So people they don't tend to settle over there because they don't get a suitable condition for settlement and for getting the basic needs. So that reason only 10% of population they resides in only in 70% of land mass. That's what we discussed. We got information. Then we started to discuss about land use. Land use. Then next concept we started to discuss. It's about a land use. So here, what is land use? Yes, the use of or making or use of a land for a different purpose, different activities. It's called as land use. It's very simple. So here there is two main factors which determines or which influences, which affects, not affect, it's affects, which affects for the land use or physical factor and human factor. That's what I wrote the last concept in the last class. It was last concept in the last class. The physical factors and human factors. These are the two factors which influences us to make use of that land. So because of this, one is physical factors like topography. What is that topography? Topography is nothing but landforms. Topography is like landforms. What are those landforms? Plains is one of the landforms. Mountains, valleys, desert, coastal areas, islands. These all are topography. This comes under topography. and the undulations in the landforms. It all comes under this topography. So the people, they tend to settle in the place where they find a flat surface. That means the plain areas. In the plain area, it's not. So why do the people they influence us, or why do the people they tend to settle in the plain areas? What is the reason? Because they get a suitable, it's very suitable for the transportation and the settlement and the agriculture, mainly agriculture activity, construction of industries. So that reason the people they want to settle in the plain area. So in the world, plain areas and the river valleys are having more inhabitations, are having more populations. So it's a one topography which influences for the land use because of good topography, plain topography. Then the climate. Second one we discussed. I have written about the second point. It's about the climate. How does the climate influences like a very high temperature? Can you see the people? The more number of population who are settled in the north, Himalayan mountain ranges. They are Himalayan mountain ranges. Hill. Are they having more population there in the Himalayan mountain ranges? No, there is no population. Why? Because it's too cold, low temperature there. The climatic condition is very low. And as we go towards the western direction in Rajasthan, do you see a more population over there in the center of Rajasthan? No. Why? Because it's having high temperature. Throughout the year, that experiences high temperature. So that's the reason people they don't want to settle over there. But we can see high population in the central part of India. Why? In the central part of India, in southern part of India, we have more population. Why? What is the reason? Because there we have a moderate climate. These areas will be prepared by the moderate climate over there in the central part and southern part of India. So that reason we are making use of the land resources for the agriculture, settlement, transportation. So that's about the climate we discussed. Then about the water availability. Water availability, the civilization, nagarikata. In Kannada we call it as nagarikata. Civilization is nothing but change in a lifestyle. The first civilization, the first and foremost civilization, it has started on the bank of river. Every civilization in the world, it has started on the bank of river. Why? To get availability of water. The water is a very basic need factor, is not? It's very much important. It's very much required for everybody. So that reason the people they settled on the bank of river to make use of water for many other different purposes. So even now also, the place which has more water availability, that influences more population. If you are getting more water there, the people they want to settle over there, so it increases the population after some times, after some years. That's what the factors, physical factors that influences. Then the human factors. Human factors like a population, more population. And suppose in a cities you will be having a more population. In some other barren land or some other remote area in forest, and we have some population, some 3 or 4 families are there in the forest, is not? And where do you want to live? There in the forest where we have only 5 families, otherwise here in the cities we have more people over here. Where do you want to live? Do you want to live in the city or there in the forest? Yes, many people they want to live in the city because we have more population. Because of a more population, we created more human resources there. Human made resources also is there. So we get a more infrastructures and more resources there to make use of that, and we get a social interaction. We get a social dependence with each other, means in between the people. We can increase our relations. We can develop our relations with the other people over there in the cities because we have more population. So people they tend to settle there in the cities, but not in the forest, because we'll get only few countable families over there, but not families, countable members. So it's very few. You don't want to settle over there because we don't get a security there. In the cities we have securities and all kind of systems will be there in the city. So that reason it influences, the population influences to make use of a land. And the technology. The technology, earlier in the ancient period, the people, we were not making use of the rock, for example. On that time, nothing was used by the people because we didn't have technology. We were not having any technology, so that reason we were not making use of anything. Suppose for example, the rock, stone. Ancient people, they were not making use of a stone. As time passed, technology improved, then they start to make use of a stone for different activities. Now we are making use of a stone to sculpture, to make some portrait of some person, is not, for buildings. And we are extracting minerals from the stones, means the rocks. We are extracting minerals from the rocks now. How could this all happen? Means possible. How could this all the things possible? It's only because of technology. So because of technology and the population, we are making use of land resources abundantly now. So that's what we were discussing. We now have written the points in the last class. Now we'll continue with the same continuation point. So now we are discussing about the second point, land use. So continuation. So here, like last is about factor, like human factors, population. So we have a classification. We have a classification of land resources based on ownership. On the earth's surface, 30% of land is not. So this every land is owned by people, except some like Antarctica, Greenland, Russia, except and some big deserts, except such a kind of a thing, such a kind of physiographic features on earth's surface. Almost every land resource is belong to humans. Every land resource is belong to humans, but in a different way. It has classified into four. Actually, it's classified in the four, but we have two important classification. One is individual resource and community. These are the two classifications. Then land on the basis of ownership. Land resources are classified like one, individual, then community. Individual land resources and community land resources. So like individual, the land which is owned by individual, the land which is controlled, land which is protected, it may be, land is owned. So a single person is the owner of that land. For example, can you give an example for me about this individual resource? The land is owned by a single person. The land, it may be 1 acre, 5 acres or anything. It's belong to one person. What is that? For example, yes, home, house, then agricultural land. These all are example as individual resources. So here the single person is the owner of that place, like an individual. The land owned by individual. For example, agricultural land, and the house, home, and these are the examples of this individual. So this land is owned by the individual, single person. Then the second one, community land resources. Community owned and individual owned resources, land resources. So in this community owned resources, the land resources is belong to the group of people, and the group of people can be used. This land can be used by the group of people, and the land resources is accessible for the group of people, community people. Means more number of people, it may be 100, 200 or 300 people who are staying in a one area, in a one community, they can make use of that resource, land resources. For example, what are those land resources? Pastures, grazing land, is not like graveyards and the playground, agriculture lands, street. So these all are example as community owned. So group of people, they can make use of that grazing land like Gomara, some wasteland, barren land, where the people of that community, they can get the help of that plant which grows there to feed their family, like animals, is not. That's about the community owned resources. And for playground, it's a land playground where the community people, they can play, they can make use of that land over there. It's belong to the community owned resources. So have I understood about this? Community, you know, the group of people, community, and the land resources. The land resources which can be used by group of people or community people. Community. A particular community was staying in particular places. So they can make use of that. And it's belong to the group of people. And these resources can be accessed by these community peoples. For example, grazing land, otherwise playground, and the pasture land like Gomala, grazing land, which is belong to nobody. That means the group of people can make use of that land. So it's about this land use. So now the land use concept, now we discuss. We'll go for a next concept. Before that, write this concept. Make it fast. Write these concepts. So in the last class we were discussing about the factor which influences land use. So it's the point after that factors, the human factors. In that human factor we have two, one is population and technology. So this is the continuation about that factor, like the human factors. Human factors we have population and technology. It's a continuation for the population factors. Population is the people, the individual people. So is that all? Make it fast. We'll go for the next one. Okay. So every resources on the earth's surface, except the place like mountain ranges, the place like covered by the ices like islands, Antarctica, then Russia, Greenland, except these, and deserts, every lands are belong to these two groups, individuals and community owned resources. So now, in under the land, we are discussing about the land, concept land. So in under the land, we have one more concept to discuss. It's about conservation of land resources. Conservation of land resources. So it's a next concept in that, the conservation of, write down, conservation of land resources. Conservation of land resources. What do you mean by conservation? What is that? Conservation refers to. What is conservation of a land resource? Conservation, what do you mean by this conservation? Conservation is nothing but protecting and making use efficiently using the particular things. Like here, efficient use of land resources, limited use of land resources is called as conservation of land resources. Like efficient use of land resources, careful use of land resources, efficient use of land resources, limited use of land resources are called as conservation of land resources. So here, why do we need to have conservation in the land resources? Why do we need to conserve this land resources? What is the use of this? And why we got this conservation concept to discuss in land resources? In real life, you need to conserve the land resources. Why? Yes, because the growing population with the growing demand, the land resources are using abundantly. We are using land resources abundantly. Unlimitedly we are making use of land resources, but the land resources are limitedly available. It's limitedly available. We know the area, total landmass area, how much it's available on the earth's surface. It's not, we know total landmass area, how much it's available. We know this point, we know the stats because it's only limited. Can you count the stars? No, because it is innumerable, uncountable. We cannot count the stars because it's unlimited. So the reason we cannot count here, but in the landmass we know how much is present. Why? Because it's limited. But we human beings, the greedy peoples, like Durase, so greedy, we call them as a greedy people. So like a greedy people, they are extracting, they are making use of these resources abundantly, unlimitedly. So if it goes same like this for the future, suppose it goes same, what we are using, making use of land without having conservation, then the future generation will be under problem. Not only the future generation, our whole earth will be under problem, under danger. So if it happens same continuously, that means if you are using the land unlimitedly without having any conservation method and without having concern about the land resources, if we are using this land continuously, we will be seeing our end of earth in sooner. To avoid all those things, to make available of this land resource for the future, to protect our land, to protect our earth, so we need to have these conservation measures, conservation of land resources. So have understood? So because of the growing population, like it is drastically changing, dramatically the population has changed from the last 50, 100 years, is it not? So because of this, with the growing population, and their ever growing, ever increasing, or ever growing demand led to more use of forest cover and land which created fear of losing our natural resources, otherwise land resources. So because of population, high population, as the population increased, the demand of humans, the greed, because of the greedy people, the demand of the land resources is increased. So because of this demand increase, we are making use of forest cover area, the land which is covered by the forest earlier. We are chopping off all this forest. We are making use of the land for transportation, construction of buildings, industries. Is it not? So we are making use of this land for many other activities, and not only that, for other activities also, like pasture, agriculture, and for grazing. For many other purposes, we are making use of this land. Why? Because of our increased demand, because the increased population. So it has led for the fear. It has created fear in us about losing our land resources. So because of all the demands, we using the land resources abundantly, so it created fear in us of losing the land resources. So because of this, we need to have this conservation of land resources. You should have these conservation measures to avoid and to overcome and to make these resources available in the future generation, to protect our land, to make use of, to make efficient use of land, to make limited use of land. We need to have this conservation of our land resources. Conservation of land resources are very much important. Right on this point, we'll go for the next one. Right on these points. So write down these points. So because of this point, this point explains what's the problem you are facing in the land resources, and because of that, why we need to have conservation measures. So because of this population here, the population is growing, and the population is growing, the demand of the population, like a people, it's also growing. When the demand increases, to satisfy their need, to satisfy their greediness, they are making use of forest cover. This land was covered by the forest. The land which is covered by the forest. We are making use of this forest cover for many other activities, and land for many other different uses, like a pasture land, grazing land. So because of these two things, to satisfy the greediness of few people, this land are used abundantly. It has created fear. It has created fear in us about losing our land resources. About losing our land resources. It's our fear. So we need to have some measures to overcome from all those things. So that reason we need to have a conservation. Conservation is nothing but efficient use of land resources. Limited use of land resources. Is that over? Write down. Is that over? Shall we go for the next one? What? Now, the conservation measures. Conservation measures. What are those conservation measures we need to follow? Conservation measures. What are those measures? how can we conserve our land? How can we conserve? First, we should check the level of degradation. The level of degradation, like a land degradation, should be checked. Means degradation antandrenu? Reducing the quality and quantity of a land, reducing its power. So the land is reducing its quantity and quality, all the powers, because of our use, because of our unlimited uses which we are getting from the land. For every inch of a land we are making use for a different activity, so it is leading towards a degradation of a land. So we need to check that degradation, level of degradation of a land. If we are making use of that land more, it degrades more. So suppose the land is getting more degradation, then we need to apply some other methods to reduce the degradation. For that, the first one is to check the level of land degradation. Land degradation must be checked. The level of land degradation must be checked. Then only we can have other plans to conserve the land resource, to protect the land resource. If you don't know the level of land degradation, how can we conserve it? You will be not knowing anything. Is not? So if you go and if you consult a doctor, he can't able to give any other treatments for you. He can't able to give any treatment for you until and unless you get the symptoms from you. Is not? Unless and until you say something what we have problem, you can't give a treatment for you. Same like that. You should get to the things which is there a problem in the land degradation. So then only we can have a planning, or we can make a planning, conservation planning for protecting these land degradations. Then there are some other methods, the other common measures to protect land resources. Common measures. These are all common measures. They're like afforestation. Afforestation andrenu, deforestation andrenu. So deforestation is nothing but chopping up or clearing the forest, cutting up all the trees. It's a deforestation. Afforestation means planting the trees, creating the forest. Creating the forest is called as afforestation. Then land reclamation. It's another one. Then your continuation. For first point, second point, and the third point. Continuation. Land reclamation, afforestation, and regulated use of chemical, pesticides and fertilizer. It's another one measures. It's a very common measure. We should regulate. Regulate means control. We should reduce the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides in agricultural activity. Then overgrazing. You should check overgrazing. These are four important other measures, conservation measures of a land resource. The afforestation is nothing but planting the trees or creating a forest. Then land reclamation is reusing. There are some lands which is unused. It's like a wasteland. In the pond, lake, earlier it was a pond, lake, now there is no water. From a 5-10 years there is no water in that lake. A kere neerila. But nobody making use of that land. So reclaiming means making use of that such a wasteland for cultivation, agriculture. It's a reclamation, land reclamation. We can make use of that land for such activities. Then regulating use of chemical pesticides and fertilizer. Because of these chemical pesticides and fertilizers, ರಾಸಾಯನಿಕ ಗೊಬ್ಬರ, because of this, ನಾವು ಈ ಅಗ್ರಿಕಲ್ಚರ್ಲಿ ಗೊಬ್ಬರಗಳು ಹಾಕ್ತೀವಿ, ರಾಸಾಯನಿಕ ಗೊಬ್ಬರಗಳು, chemical fertilizer. It affects the fertility of a soil, the humus of a soil. Then directly that affects into this land resources. So we should reduce, regulate means reduce, control. We should control the use of chemical pesticides and the fertilizer in agriculture. Then check on overgrazing. Grazing means growing crops like a fodder crops for animals. ಈ ದನ ಕರುಗಳಿಗೆ ಊಟ ಅಂತೇಳಿ ಬೆಳಿತಾರೆ. ಊಟ ಅಂತ ಲೈಕ್ ಮೇವುಗಳು. In foreign countries they practice in more land, more than 500 acres and 100 acres. They grow the grazing foods like a fodder crops in a foreign countries, only for the fodder, as a fodder for the animals. So there we need to have check in that, because in agriculture field one after one will grow the crops, but you will have some gap in between. 1 month or 2 months will give a gap. So in between that gap, that soil will get fertility. But in the grazing, without any gap, they grow the crop. They grow a crop continuously, that to multiple crops. So that affects all the fertility of soil, holding capacity. So all those things. For that, we should have a check on the overgrazing. So these all common measures. Write down this. It's about this concept. The third concept. Write down. So write down this concept. So that's what we discussed about land. The next class we will discuss from the soil. The next concept is about the soil, then water, then natural resources, wildlife resources we have. But land, the three concepts we discussed, one is land use and conservation of land resources. Write down these concepts. Is that over? There are 4 the common measures along with these 5.